next want to do is introduce our speaker, Harvey Moore, and I'm going to turn it over to him. You know what, Harvey, when we put out the poster, I could not believe the response that we got. We had phone calls, we had emails. Honestly, I've never run into this in 8 years. The only problem was, like this is the poster here, it says Harvey Moore, the Mighty Vulcan. A lot of the phone calls, they thought you were from a different planet. Maybe on the Star Trek series. So we had to explain, no, Harvey's ears are actually, they're normal.
Most of the time.
I was going to say, and as far as we know, he's not from a different planet, as long as you don't listen to him, because when he starts talking, you might start thinking, what the heck? But anyway.
So I'm far, far away.
Yes, yes. Anyway, we're really glad to have you here this evening. And Harvey was, my guess, born and raised in Scotland, joined the RAF at the age of 18 and was with them for 18 years. 12 years. 12 good years. And lo and behold, after he left the RAF, he actually came to British Columbia, Vancouver, where he spent a great deal of time, I don't even know how long, but retired to Salt Spring Island, where he lives today. And he assured me he's still interested in aviation. So while he was there, having flown a lot of the Cold War jets, the Canberra, the Valiant, what am I missing? As well as the Vulcan, of course. He did, of course, fly the Vulcan, and that's what he's here to talk about. So that's the Mighty Vulcan. It's the airplane. It isn't the origin. He's here to explain all of this. So, Harvey, welcome, and it's all yours. Oh, by the way,
Thank you, Doug.
yes.
So I'd like to thank Doug and Alan Botting. Is Alan here? There he is.
He's here.
For the poster. I'd also like to congratulate the museum on acquiring the Lancaster. So on that theme, because Avro and Roy Chadwick, I'd like to present, and they can auction this off or do what they like. There's a poster here on, and it's framed down there on the table behind you. You're not getting the framed edition because that came from my son many moons ago. But this is a poster with all the aircraft and all the crests of the RAF, my RCAF squadrons during the war. And also the book, Vulcan 607, which is about the Falklands caper, which I'll be talking about tonight. So that's donated to the museum.
Harvey, I forgot that you don't have the amp on, so when you need sound, let me know. I'll come up.
Yes, sir. I need the sound up.
You have the sound now?
Might as well.
I'll get it.
Now bear with me, I'm recovering from a cold, that's why my voice is that kind of timber. And I'd like to thank my daughter and my son for pulling all this presentation together, because it's a way beyond my capabilities. So Roy Chadwick, who designed the Lancaster, these are the drawings that he was coming up with in 1947, which was the beginning of the prototype 698 and also the Vulcan. The Air Ministry, in their wisdom, in the beginning of 1947, came out with very stringent, optimistic requirements for a four-jet. They wanted it to be pressurized, crew of 5. They wanted the bomb bay had to be 22 feet long and 5 feet wide because the weapon then was rather large. They wanted a range of 1,700 miles. They wanted it to do 500 miles an hour, about 45,000 feet, which with the engines they had then was a bit of a push. But the crunch was, they wanted all this in a bloody airplane, sorry, an airplane that was not more than 100,000 pounds. Not a chance. Anyway, being Britain, 8 companies initially bid on this. They reduced it to 4. They came out with another sort of sub-contract for a more conventional aircraft. So Shorts and Vickers got in on that. So there's the Shorts Sperrin, which if you don't know was a straight wing. It had 4 engines, and it was an interesting configuration with the engines in tandem on each wing, one above the other in each wing. And the Valiant, which was a mid-wing aircraft. So it was the Valiant that they chose through Vickers. Unfortunately, Vickers didn't choose the right aluminium. Sorry, aluminium. And I was on the Valiants in the early 60s, and so was Jeff Morris. And crystalline, the main spars, everything was just breaking up. So they were scrapped. The aircraft I was involved with, WP213, had 3,500 hours. And I flew it down to St. Athan to be broken up. So anyway, that was the Valiant. The Avro and Handley Page, so we had from the war, Avro with the Lancaster and Handley Page with the Halifax, so they were keeping that tradition going. Had more advanced designs, and that was going to take a bit longer in getting these airborne. So, as I'm saying, this is the initial concept, and that was not going to work for the chord and the depth of the wing to take the engines. So what they came up with.
She pointed at the there. That's where the antenna is.
There we go. So the early days, we had the 707 that had A, B, C, and D, very British. The A was for high speed, the B was for low speed, the C was a tandem, and the D was for control systems. The first A lasted 2 weeks, and unfortunately it crashed and they lost the test pilot. Rolly Falk then was flying the A. So this was at Farnborough in the early 50s, where they had the 2 prototypes, the 698s, Vulcans, with the straight wing, and the 4. So the Americans were suitably impressed, 6 flying triangles. So that was the A. Oh, the A. And again at Farnborough. So that was a prototype, and that's the last time you see it, just a straight wing. They had troubles at high speed with turbulence coming off the wingtips, and they redesigned to give it a kink. And I never understood why they never used vortex generators or winglets, but that was what the wind tunnel stuff was telling them to do. That's a Mark 1, where you see the beginning of the kink in the wing. The Mark 1 didn't have the ECM. The Mark 1A had the electronic countermeasures bulge at the tail. This is
Flown by Wickham on Rowley Fort and found Russia actually do a barrel roll in front of the crowd. Extraordinary. The concept of Delta Wing was just
frowned upon. So the Mark 1A kept the Mark 1 came into service with 83 Squadron in 57 at Scampton. We don't have Roger Turner here. He was a navigator on the Mark 1s. And then in the early 60s, the Mark 2 came out. The Mark 1 had troubles, they had generators, the electronics side of it was poor. It had ailerons and elevators, and in the Mark II, all the flying surfaces were elevons, so there was a change there. The wingspan increased up to 111 feet, right?
Yes.
This is our in-house Vulcan.
Testing.
Quality control, you know.
And the attitude on the ground was slightly different, the nose was lowered. But the main difference were on the engines. We're up to 200 series with 17,500 pounds of thrust. And then it came out with 300 series engines, which gave over 20,000 pounds. Great. So this gives you an idea of the size of the bomb bay. This is going back to 47 when they said it had to be 22 feet and 5 feet. And the nuclear bomb in the end was just over 1,000 pounds. Oh. But this was great because they could have 21,000 pound bombs clean in the bomb bay in 3 stacks of 7, which was relevant a few years later. So there's a nice presentation of what it looked like. It was great for air shows because if it was raining, you're underneath the wing. And then we'd tell people that the probe at the front there was a 40mm cannon. And there's great old 607, which is at Waddington now. At the front here, you'll see the TFR, Terrain Following Radar. Bear with me as I come out with all these abbreviations. And so one of the Battle of Britain Day, September the 15th, we're always having air shows and going off. So one of them, I had the aircraft over to Gaydon, and we had a vehicle there, so we went off to this wedding because it was Vic McNabney's navigator getting married at Stratford-on-Avon. It was really posh. And we came back and the weather was lousy and they were trying to make a show of the aircraft leaving. And unfortunately the Vulcan was blocking a number of aircraft, so we had to expedite, and we did a quick start-up and blasted out of it. We blew the beer tin over. So that's the Vulcan. You'll like this one.
No traffic at this time. I'll just wait 30 seconds. Flying.
An extraordinary phenomenon exploded onto the airshow scene in 2009. Nothing in years has had such a dramatic effect. Mighty Vulcan XH558 flew again. Our cameras were at 20 events with Vulcan, 2 of them in continental Europe and many of them in spectacular weather conditions. Our exclusive access gets you behind the scenes with the crew, the engineers and with the volunteers. 3 cameras in the cockpit take you on board for a unique view of the season finale. We fly in formation with XH558 for wonderful air-to-air shots. You can help support the future of this flying icon. Nearly half of what you pay goes to Vulcan to the Sky.
It was a fun aeroplane. Alright, back to the serious stuff. In the 60s, the Great Detergent. Or the V-Force as we called it. So this is the, excuse all the abbreviations, the ORP, so the Operational Readiness Pans, when we were on QRA, Quick Reaction Alert. So this is when it got serious and you'd be in the cockpit, the aircraft was cockpit ready, and you can see from this just how quickly we got airborne. I don't know why, I was always number 4, but it was all quiet. It was great for displays, you know, you get all the brass coming or the local bears. And, no sound. You had one button to press, and each engine had a 3000 psi air bottle. So when you press that, all 4 engines wound up. The electrical connections were angled, so you just rolled. The crew chief pulled his lead out. All he was there for was to make sure they weren't on fire. And 1, 2, 3, 4, airborne in less than 2 minutes. It was a bit of a rush. So anyway, just at the end in '69, one of the, there was the Imperial Defence College chaps, all the brass, coming to Waddington, and it was a full air display. We had the Red Arrows, we had the PA, the Lancaster, the 2 Spits, and the Hurricane came in, and it was quite the show. So the day before, we have a full dress rehearsal. So here we go, boom, nothing, funny, hammering away at this button and nothing. So the other 3 take off, and I called the tower and said, you know, won't start. So I said, come on, out. So we're at the end of the runway and had this magnificent position to see the whole air show. And then after that, the procedure was the electronics officer had to have a fuse had gone, ready to jam in if this never happened again, of course. So anyway, the next day it was fine, and we went off. And you'll see in my logbook, that was literally the last flight I had. It was in May '69. And when we came back, we were doing a letdown with what we call the GCA, ground controlled approach. And you get it was female WAFs we had doing the air traffic, talking away. And it's usually a constant, you know, you're on glide path, you're on heading, this, that, and the next thing. And then there was a gap. And to silence. Funny. Anyway, we landed, and that night in the bar, she said, these other returns came on the scope and merged. And this was from Scampton. You know, they were supposed to stay Victor Height, but the Spitz, the two Spitz and the Hurricane were in formation, supposed to stay visual conditions. There was broken cloud, and they were very adjacent. So when you get on GCA and the blips merge, it's close. Didn't feel a thing. All right, at Scampton, they had the Blue Steel. This is our British standoff bomb, which was very cumbersome, very expensive, took a hell of a time to get ready. But anyway, that was Scampton for you, 617. And that was the standoff bomb, which they had to modify the bomb bay doors to set it in place. This is interesting. This is excuse me, at the tail end. We had a bumper there for, you know, if you really rotated. And when we came into land, you know, you could really get aerodynamic drag because of the wingspan. And what we'd play around with, because we're always playing around, it was a 28-foot diameter brake chute, which they didn't like you using because of having to crew out to pick it up from the runway. But it came to a stage where it was needing servicing, so you're told to come in, land, and use the brake chute. So this day there was about 20 knot headwind. We had to use the brake chute. So when we were in the circuit, we played around with the fuel, which you weren't supposed to do, and get the CAG further back. So it was getting a bit twitchy, but yeah, didn't have to pull so hard. And then this little widget gave a light when you got the aircraft right, and that was dragging on the ground. It gave a light up in the coaming, so you knew your maximum angle of dangle. And we would come over the threshold and stream before you touched down, which again was a no-no, but it saved time, and it was a couple of seconds for it to deploy. So you came over the threshold, right attitude, streamed the chute, 20 knot headwind, and you stopped. And they say, what are you doing away down there? So that was very effective. When we were taxiing, the ladder was taken into the cockpit and stowed. And you're supposed to shut the door when you left the dispersal. We would leave it open because from my position up in the top looking down, that was the view you got. So with the yellow line for the taxi, because it was a bit of a sod in the way forward, trying to get around if it was a tight taxiway. So this is a brilliant way. Co-pilot would look out to make sure you weren't going to hit anything, and I'd just taxi, looking out down through the door, and say, you're good because you're always on the yellow line. And then shut the door. Remember, shut the door before you take off. There's the cockpit. Very antiquated. But the nice thing was the just a fighter grip, not a yoke. Just and then that bunch of throttles there, very comfortable. Just, and the way you went, you had 80,000 pounds of thrust. What was the thing that?
Right there. Oh, the pointer?
Yeah,
Right there. The red button.
so up here, this was the ram air turbine release. The Vulcan, because the engines were buried in the wing, he never had a single engine flame out because it would surge and take out the other engine. So a lot of the practice when we were doing the OCU was double engine flame out and takeoff. Big boot full of rudder, going sideways and climbing and making a lot of noise. When it happened for real, you're airborne, electrics were the main thing, because if you lost your electrics, that was your control gone, because there were electrically controlled hydraulic motors for the 8 flying surfaces. So when you pulled that, it released a ram air turbine into the slipstream, so that gave more voltage and electricity onto the bus bar. It also shed all non-essential electrics, so I got rid of some of the nav stuff, I got rid of radios, and just concentrated on staying airborne. So that was a good widget. These are all the control surfaces here. Each control surface had its own power motor. The rudder had 2, because if you lost the rudder and you went asymmetric, you were in trouble. This looks, it was cozy. Also down here, once you got in, there's the secondary handle for ejection between your legs. And then when you got into the seats, there was another console pulled down with all the fuel controls and autopilot. So once you were in, you were in. And as you can see, the visibility was not great. So when you were doing an air display and there was a crosswind, it was a bit of a trick to do your turns and try and work out what the drift was. But, yeah, there's a runway. So this is taken from the book. The cramped, comfortless Vulcan cockpit was no place to spend 16 hours. This was an incident at Scampton. Crew going out for a night flight, all aboard, and they had a 17-year-old air cadet with them, ATC cadet, and started up. When it started number 3 engine, ba-boom, turbine let loose. They went on fire. They bailed out. They were fine. They were in the dispersal, and all the fire engines got there, still burned out. But they managed to keep the in-flight refueling probe, which was essential later on when we get to the Falklands. But that's how quickly they could go up in flames. Because behind here, that was large, it was a huge fuel tank. And then the other fuel tanks were in the wing. Alright, so we could carry 21,000 pound bombs, and that's what it looked like. That's 599 dropping on them. Looking very nice. Right, just some stuff before we get to the video. The video covers it, it's 45 minutes, but it just shows you how far away. That's 4,000 miles from the UK, and then we had 4,000 miles to get down to the Falklands and get back. And this is the whole procedure of the number of Victors. So it was in-flight refueling, and we had Victors refueling Victors. The Victor could refuel on the fighter aircraft 3 points. So you could have from there the drums outside wings and also from the center. So they could refuel 3 fighters at a time. With the Vulcan, it was 1 on the fuselage one. So they had 11 of these at wide awake at Ascension. So this was the procedure. Everybody took off. I mean, they had the 13 aircraft all thundering off to go in formation on the start.
The plan is that this vast armada flies to the first refueling point. Half the Victors refuel the other half, one Victor refuels the Vulcan, and then those aircraft return to base. The procedure is repeated at the next refueling point, and again, until there's just one Victor left to refuel the Vulcan before its final run into the target.
And it was really a question of Victors refueling, Victors refueling, Victors refueling, and it went on and on and on. And all the time, the formation was being reduced as one Victor had given all its fuel and had to go back to ascension.
To the video. This is a nice painting done, the penultimate refueling, the last Victor getting juiced up. And they were going through an electrical storm, so it was turbulent and it was very iffy. And they hadn't worked out the fuel consumption very well. When you're doing formation flying, of course, you're using more fuel. This poor thing with 21,000 pounds of fuel on board was, on the limits. So they were using up fuel far more than they bargained on. And the last refueling, he only got 6,000 pounds of fuel, and they were cursing the last Victor. But the last Victor had left himself short, and he was waiting for refueling to get back to ascension. And no, it was all interesting. This is something else they picked up. The Vulcans were 3 months from being disbanded, so the crews were all end of the days, and then the invasion of the Falklands. They had nothing to really jam because the Argentinians had some good kit on anti-aircraft stuff. So this was borrowed from the Buccaneers and jerry-rigged onto the 2 Vulcans. And so they had a loom of cables and a plywood box for the electronics officer to monitor the radars. Navigation, they had nothing to get them over, because there's over the South Atlantic, there's no land, nowhere to get fixes from. They had no GPS stuff or inertial nav. So then in 62, 82, they had just acquired the VC-10s from British overseas aircraft. So they stripped the INS from them, put it in the cockpit, another plywood box, another loom of cables, and a crash course on how to use it. So it was all getting a bit cluttered. When they left Warrington to fly down to Ascension, they had the 21,000 pounds of bombs on board. They had 2 crew chiefs, so there's 7 of them in that little cockpit up front. So typical sort of initiation on what they were trying to do. And that was arriving at this volcanic island in the middle of the South Atlantic. All right, any questions on that, on thoughts?
Yeah. In 1980, at the time of the war, I had to go to Brazil, and I went in via Europe and used my British passport rather than my Canadian. And they gave me a real hard time getting into, because one of your planes had landed somewhere in Brazil.
In Rio.
In Rio, okay.
Okay, there was originally 7 black buck sorties planned. First one was that, the bombing. They had a second bombing one where they fused bombs wrongly, and there were supposed to be air bursts that became as ground bursts. Then after that, from the Americans, we got the Shrike anti-radar missile, which was a big sucker. There was only a limited number of Vulcans that could carry this, because earlier on they were going to have the Vulcans with 301 engines. They had reinforced the wing and had a mounting point for the Skybolt missile. So that was reduction again on the aircraft available that could use that to carry the Shrike. So that was another plywood bolts and aluminum cables coming to operate this thing. And of course the crews didn't know anything about it. It was just sort of press here and it will go. It was not Monty, McDougall, Neil McDougall was a pilot coming back, and the weather was appalling, and they got the last refueling point off Rio, and it was so wild. The drogue came and literally wiped out his refueling probe. So going back, they had done the attack on Stanley. One missile had gone off, and the other one hung up. So they're back, they're trying to dump this darn thing, and they couldn't release it. They were limited on their knowledge and what they could do. So now they're having to divert into Rio. What have they got on their wing? A flaming great missile designed to take out live working radars. They sweated buckets. Anyway, they landed, they were interned for I think 10 days. Brazilians took charge of the Shrike, they hit the missile. And then they released the crew on the condition that that aircraft and that crew wouldn't be involved in any more raids. But that was, they did 5 altogether raids, and that was it. But going back to refueling, you think of the fuel that was used.
Yeah.
And the Americans, to begin with, the Brits realized just how much fuel. They diverted a complete tanker with aviation fuel that was going to one of their Del Garcia,
Diego
it was going there, diverted to Ascension, and they had these pipes to fill. They had a whole convoy of refueling trucks, backwards and forwards to the airfield. But again, it's logistics, drives you nuts. They had all these tankers going backwards and forwards, but because it's a volcanic island and it was so abrasive with the roads, they were going through tiles like you wouldn't believe. So then had to get piping in to run the piping to the airfield to save the tankers going backwards and forwards. It was all this chain reaction of things, but yeah, I don't think the Brazilians were on our side.
I think they wanted the Vulcan out because the Pope was coming, wasn't he?
Sorry?
The Pope was coming and they didn't want the Vulcan sitting there. That's what I got from there over there.
Religion gets into it. All right, that's basically it. I'll just give you a little 10-minute wind down. Very British music, and this was only October 2015, not far away, and this was the last sort of Vulcan round northern England. You can Google all these. They had another 2 down in the south of England, but this is rather pleasant. It just shows you we're at 500 feet, meandering round the low level, but they just went everywhere to all the old airfields.
There's a documentary on Netflix, an hour long, on the last flight of the Vulcan. That was the privately reconstructed one by the gentleman that spent £10 million on it or something when they flew.
Oh, really?
I thought that's what this was. They took it for a tour around Great Britain.
Yeah, they did a couple of ones,
It's
yeah.
parked now, but it was hauled out of kind of a scrap pile and rebuilt
Yeah.
and flown.
Around the UK, I mean, they're still using it, were the low-level routes. And the usual military, you had commitments for 6 months, you know, all the boxes to tick. The Perspex Palace, so many night exercises, so many landings, this, that, and the next thing. And they had all these low, because we were low level, I did train in a lot of the trials on the TFR. This was a Westinghouse terrain following radar. So in the end, we had this thing, this is 68, we had the Vulcan, 300 feet, 300 knots, on instruments. So you pull down the steel blinds, and the co-pilot's looking out. So you're flying, keeping the speed right and the height, and keeping an eye on the co-pilot and see what the twitch factor was. So it was October or November, and it was one of those ridge of high pressure over the UK, and we said, we could knock off our whole 6 months commitment low level. We went in south East England, right along the south coast, across by Bristol, across the Bristol Channel, through Wales, up the west coast into Scotland, and then climbed up. It's gorgeous.
Then I noticed in the takeoff, the pilot in the left seat, with his left hand on the stick, ran the throttles up with his right hand. Why didn't you use the co-pilot in that scenario?
Oh, co-pilots. That's why I keep my watch like this, because you can keep an eye on the time and then... No, it's just...
You get my point. The left hand, unless the guy's left-handed, he's not going to be as good as he is with the right hand.
Oh, we get quite good.
I guess they'd have to.
Yeah.
It's still very strange.
But I realise think handing pilot landers the controls.
Yeah.
Nowhere do you slip that.
Two last little stories. We got time?
We got time.
44 Squadron, so I joined that in 66. And we were the new crew. So a couple of months in, there was an 8 o'clock slot, which was a sod because you had to be there at 5 in the morning. So new crew, you do the 8 o'clock slot. So we said, let's utilize this airplane and do something different. Let's see how high we can get it. Let's wear the whole gear, because people didn't use all the equipment because it was a hassle to get into. So it was in your skivvies, and then you had an AVS, air ventilated suit, which you fitted. And then you had your flying suit, then you had anti-G leggings, then you had a pressure jerkin, and we had a special pressure helmet, you know, because we were going high. So you had all this lot, and then when you waddled up and got into your seat, you had what was called a PEC, personal equipment connector, which connected all this lot up to the ejection seat. So anyway, off we go, 8 o'clock in the morning, and we climb out from Warrington over the North Sea, and we just head north, right up to the Arctic Circle, to Jan Mayen Island. And we do one turn, and we come back, and we had called up Lossiemouth and Kinloss, and Lookers and all the fighter bases. He said, come and get us. So cruise climb, so optimum on power settings, you're getting lighter on fuel, you're climbing. We came up over Scotland at 55,000 feet. We ended up over 60,000 feet. Service ceiling 55. Everything was on, well, it wasn't much fun. Everything was getting a bit iffy. So anyway, we came down to 50,000 feet and then did some radar bombing. Normally we did a radar bombing at 25,000 feet. You gave the height as a coded number. 3 times they asked, you know, because it's a bit warm, and be at 50,000 feet. So we did the bombing, and then the weather wasn't very good. We were a new crew, and they said, you've got to be overhead with 20,000 pounds of fuel, because you may be diverted to Germany, so there's weather coming in. So we were overhead with 20,000 pounds of fuel at 50,000 feet instead of 20,000. We started descent, we're overhead with 20,000 and we're descending. You've got to know the rules. We went almost halfway to Norway because it's a big ruddy glider. We didn't have air brakes out. Turned round, came back. We had that aircraft on internal fuel airborne for 7 hours 15. So we got a lot of beer on that one. John Edison. People know John Edison?
Yeah.
He was my co-pilot. And he was good. So in '68, he was lining up to be a captain. And at that stage, he'd be in the left, we did occasional flights with him in the left-hand seat, and I'd run the fuel on the right. So it was the beginning of the year. And he's on the left, I'm on the right, night flight, exercise up the North Sea. So we're clambering up. On fuel handling, we used the Bombay fuel for the climb. So we're at 28,000, 29,000 feet, number one engine starts winding down. No low pressure warning on the fuel. We weren't in icing. Funny. So we don't say anything. You see, and I'm trying to relight it, and John's flying. Then number two engine starts winding down. Oh, you better pay attention here. So I pull the rat to get rid of all the non-essential electrics, and then number three engine starts winding down. We thought, because you're at full weight. The Vulcan, you couldn't dump fuel. So all the navigator said was the heading for base is 160. And we start descending because it doesn't fly very well on one. Put out a pan call and then descended, and we got one engine back. So we had number 4 and then we got number 1 engine back about 20,000 feet and started to breathe a bit more relaxed. But we couldn't understand why we'd lost the power. Anyway, lower down, we got the other engine back and we had all in. So we get back to, with air brakes out, trying to get the drag and use up the fuel and land. And then of course the duty pilot says, well, you can come in and do circuits and bumps. And I said, no. The rear crew are quite happy standing by the door because we didn't know. And then next morning, a fuel tank had ruptured in the Bombay. There wasn't a lack of pressure. 2 reducing valves. So you used to have 5 psi on the fuel tank so that if you had negative G, you weren't causing fluctuation. 2 reducing valves had failed, and we had God knows what pressure from the engine going into the tanks, and it literally ruptured it. So I don't know how much fuel had been sloshing around the Bombay. So luckily I hadn't put the bomb doors open to give more drag, otherwise we could have been a big blue flash over the North Sea. So anyway, I got the blame because they said, oh, you mishandled the fuel. Anyway, that was some of this stuff. That's it.
I have to say, first of all, the Vulcan is a marvelous machine. And I'm going to have to say, you're a marvelous storyteller. And when you have a marvelous machine being told, about the marvelous machine by a marvelous storyteller, it's marvelous. So it was magic, quite frankly. Now, we're going to present you, and I feel a little humble doing this, but you told me you were continuing your interest in aviation. Billy Barker, one of Canada's top pilots, and this is his autobiography. And so we hope that this goes into your library. And if you ever want to get rid of it, we'll take it back into ours. We're going to present you with this and with our thanks for tonight. Now, what you may not know is that retired Vulcan pilots, they're almost like a cult. Well, the family, you know what I mean? And they have a secret greeting, let's just say, one Vulcan pilot to the other Vulcan pilot. I think it's only fair tonight, so I'm going to say, Harvey, may you live long and prosper.